to have two great analysts with us, and two gentlemen who are really committed to the growth of the nonprofit sector. I've been working with Woodrow Rosenbaum for probably about 5 or 6 years, and first met him when he was with a firm called With Intent, and he was doing the Giving Tuesday Data Commons work. So as all of us in the charity world know, Giving Tuesday is really the biggest day of charitable giving in the year, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. And Woodrow and his group have been compiling the trends of what's been happening on Giving Tuesday. And they have been using a snapshot of the CFC giving through those days and weeks, as well as they've done that. But he's also been a subcontractor to Tribal Tech and has been helping us analyze the CFC. So at the end of each campaign, we share with him about 5 years of data so that he can give back to us some of the insights that he gleans and some of the recommendations he's made that we can, look at this and continue to grow the combined federal campaign. Recently, With Intent has become a part of a larger organization, Darrow. And so Woodrow is also joined today by the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Darrow, Ben McNamee, and they're going to walk us through some of the insights that they've gleaned by looking at 5 years of the data from the CFC. Now, the year period that we're using, 2019 through 2023, but they've also done this ever since 2017. So we've kind of built this up to having these 5 5-year look backs. Now, Woodrow and Ben, I'm not going to share the story that I learned about how Darrow was named. So I'll leave that to you, or I'll leave it to anyone on the line who wants to look it up, to go to wearedarrow.com. So with that, I'll turn it to Woodrow and Ben.
Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate that introduction. It's great to be working with you again this year on this. There's a lot of context. Obviously, there's the CFC campaign exists within a broader ecosystem of giving and charitable activity in the U.S. And we look at a lot of different components of that. So I will probably find some opportunities to chime in with some of that contextual information as we go. However, Ben really is the one who has been leading this research over the last few years, knows it inside and out. So you're going to hear mostly from Ben this afternoon. That said, please, I think we have a Q&A function here. So feel free to drop questions in. There is a lot to go through here. We are not going to dwell on every single slide and chart. If something's not clear, we want to make sure that we clarify things and that this is really useful information. Feel free to drop those questions in. We will both take them as we go, as well as make sure that there's some time at the end, and we can always go back and review some of this information to make sure it's really clear. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ben and let him walk you through what we are seeing in the data.
Thanks, Woodrow and Tony, for the introduction. Great to be here, sharing what we've seen and what we've learned looking at the data over the last 5 years, but in particular over the last campaign and changes from the year before. As Woodrow said, there is quite a lot of data that we have and quite a lot of analysis we've done. Some of it made it into a report, some of it made it into this presentation. So we'll provide some high-level summaries and analyses across a number of different topics. So high-level performance, overall performances, risks and opportunities. We got pledge sizes, how people pledge, the continuation of people over time when and how they drop out, retiree perspective, looking at charities and how they participate and then the implications of their participation, And then new this year as well, looking at some impacts of targeted communications and giving events like Giving Tuesday as well. So quite a bit to go through. We'll keep it in our presentation fairly high level, but very happy to dive deeper and jump in where and how interest arises, and so have more to share as needed as well. And Tony, thanks for the introductions. You now know who we are. All right, so starting with the overview, the sort of key main opportunities, key main risks that came out this year from the data. The both new participants and retiree donors are keys. Sorry, I hear. Is there a question? I heard someone talking.
I think
No.
they're muted now then.
Okay. In particular for new donors, looking at targeting outreach, promoting smaller donations, seeing a strong connection between new participants and small donations, being a potential avenue to create long-lasting donors as an opportunity. Retiree participants are the one segment of donors who give and are increasing their giving and participation over time. And as more and more of the workforce retires and reaches retirement age, they'll become an increasingly important part of the campaign. And so looking at them is going to be important. Targeted communications, you'll see, have dramatic impact on participation. And so very good opportunity to use more and strategic targeted communications aligned around giving events, such as Giving Tuesday, such as other events in the world that cause people to give, looking at international events, looking at natural disasters, etc., leveraging those to increase participation. At the same time, there are some risks. We're seeing decreases in the number of charities participating. And unfortunately, as charities lapse their participation, they take some donors with them. Donors are loyal to charities, and so there's risks associated with charity loss in the program. And then there's a large and consistent drop in the number of small pledges. Participation is going down much more frequently amongst small donors, not large donors. And so focusing on that area is going to be important to stem losses over time. And the top line data, stories, giving is still decreasing, participation is still decreasing. Very consistent, I think, as Woodrow would say, is sort of all the analysis across America and much of the world. Giving is decreasing across the board, so not a surprise there. Average pledge size is increasing, which might be a good sign, but it's mostly due to fewer small pledges rather than more giving by people who give already. And donors are loyal to charities, very much see that in the data. Donors give to the same charities repeatedly over time, which opens up new avenues to explore the relationships between charities and participation and how that can be leveraged going forward as well. We look at total changes over time from 2022 to 2023. We see a 3% decrease in the total value of all pledges. This is an amount of just over $2 million to a total of $68.5 million in 2023. So looking at over the 5-year period from 2019, this is a continued decrease over time. However, 2022 seemed to be pointing to larger decreases that might be on the way, and that has been reversed in 2023. So giving is decreasing at a slower rate than it has in 2022, which is a good sign. On the other hand, volunteering is mostly plateaued. Big drop in volunteering over the pandemic, which is quite expected given what we know of how things were in the pandemic. But since then, a relatively stable level of volunteering hours of around 85,000 hours volunteered a year as well. In terms of total participation, we're looking at a decrease to around just over 210,000 participants, both across one-time and recurring pledges in 2023, as compared to around 225 in 2022. So we're seeing decreases across the board, except for a stability in volunteering at the high level. And we can see the implication of that on the pledge size. Mean one-time pledges increasing from 175 to 187, an increase of 7.3%, and recurring pledges an increase from 339 to 349, an increase of 2.91%. So increases in the average pledge size, despite decreases in overall pledging as well. So what does that?
And actually,
Yeah.
I'll just let me jump in here and address a couple of questions that came up, because I think this will inform a lot of what comes next. So first of all, there's a question here about whether GoFundMe accounts are disrupting traditional giving, and there are lots of other examples of many other ways that people are able to give and are participating in giving. And this is something we've looked at extensively outside of this analysis. And it is a little bit complex, but the short answer is no. We don't see either cannibalization of giving or a competitive nature to those other forms of giving. There isn't a kind of replacement behavior going on. And I could go into more depth about how the data demonstrate this, but it is really important to understand that that diversity of opportunity is not competitive for nonprofit donations. It is, in fact, tends to be correlated with more nonprofit giving on an individual behavior basis. Then there's another question about whether this drop in what we're seeing in the CFC campaign is because organizations have their own donate now button. We don't have an analysis of that, but I can say that based on what I have seen, I think there's probably a competing factors here. On the one hand, yes, you can see that if an organization is in a place is driving people to their own donation page, that might compete with the CFC as the mechanism for supporting that organization. However, I suspect as far as the CFC campaign itself is influenced by the overall marketplace for donations. I suspect what we're actually seeing, the more significant factor is that, generally speaking, organizations' footprint of engagement is shrinking. They are talking to a shrinking pool of people and focusing more and more on what they consider high-value donors for a lot of reasons that we could get into. But that has the effect that is likely, I suspect, impacting the CFC campaign itself, because those organizations then have kind of less brand affinity and awareness year over year, which would otherwise bolster the likelihood of those organizations being engaged by donors through the campaign. So again, have not analyzed this, but looking at the factors that we look at in the overall marketplace, I think that's probably the most significant factor in terms of what might be driving some of this suppression.
Yeah, thanks, Woodrow. And just your comment on the reduced pool of potential funders as well comes into play with looking at the small pledges and the decrease in small pledges. So we've divided up the data into small pledges defined as those under $300 and large pledges defined as those over $300. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a drop of 100,000 small pledges, significant drop, nearly 50% drop, but only 10,000 drop in larger pledges over the same time period, roughly a 15% drop in that time. So the high net worth, the sort of higher, more generous donors are still participating slightly less, but it's the small donors who are more likely to not participate as the years go on. And who are the small donors? Small donors are new donors, essentially. So this is the average pledge size by new, recaptured, or retained donors. So a recaptured donor is one that has donated in previous years and has now come back to be a donor again. A retained donor is a donor who has given every year over multiple years, and a new donor is one who has never given before. As we can see consistently over the last 3 years, new donors are giving smaller pledges than participants, current and past participants of the program as well. And so focusing on these new donors, capturing these new donors, promoting perhaps smaller donation amounts, which might be counterintuitive, might be a way to encourage new participation, and then transferring the new participants to retained participants over time as well. Looking at sort of briefly looking at how participants donate over time, we're looking at paper pledging and mobile pledging as the focus. This is also online, which is the large share of the donations. We're seeing potentially a plateau in pledges coming from paper forms, decrease significantly, but then somewhat stabilized, perhaps over the last couple of years, both in terms of dollars and volunteering as well. And what we see in the losses as well in paper pledges, that the losses are mostly coming from a couple of different departments and agencies in the federal government. In particular, USPIS and Department of Defense have seen the largest decreases in pledges from paper donations. USPIS and Department of Defense more likely to have participants and staff and potential participants who aren't working at a desk and are out in the field, you know, walking the beat in the neighborhood, or on the base, out in the world and not at a desk, and potentially paper being more important for these situations in these contexts than desk jobs working on a computer all day long. And so potentially looking at paper being an important source of giving for these areas, and maybe want to focus on that as well. Are they switching to mobile is the question. If they're not at a computer and they've traditionally been given by paper, maybe that would be easier for them to capture them through mobile giving, and that's where they're going instead. And so we're looking at number of mobile pledges as well. If you look at the numbers on the left, these are quite small numbers, and so overall mobile pledges make up a very small proportion of overall giving. And despite the big increase in 2021, it has been decreasing from that small amount as well to just around 850 in 2023. Sorry, there we go. But there are signs that perhaps it is growing in importance, and given the drops in paper pledges, given the prevalence and the ease with which a mobile pledge might happen and might be able to happen, there might be a role to play for focusing on mobile pledges going forward. Mobile pledge, as with all kinds of pledges, mobile pledges are increasing in average size, but they're increasing at a rate that's faster than both online and paper giving as well. And so the relative importance of these and the amounts that are being given through mobile is increasing over time. And so it might be worth looking deeper into how mobile could be a way to help stem the losses in paper pledging in USPIS and DoD in particular. Retention and acquisition. So this, when we first did the analysis, participant retention was quite a story because we saw a fairly significant shift in what was happening from new and retained participants. So we can see over here from 2022 to 2023, a significant increase in the number of new participants and continued to decrease in the number of retained participants. Similarly, with the total dollars raised from new and retained participants. It turns out that there was some technical issues that may have caused some retained donors to be recategorized as new donors in the data set. And so unfortunately, the really compelling story here is now in question. Participant retention may be down, and sort of looking at the trends over the last 3 or 4 years, it is going down. likely not as significant as these charts show, and also likely not as significant an increase in the number of new participants as well. That's backed up by the fact if we look at the changes in new participants and retained participants by department, the largest increases in the number of new participants coincides with where we saw lots of decreases in retained participants, suggesting a miscategorization rather than drops and increases. All right, retiree donors. So retiree donors is now where we start to see really good bright spots in the data, really good participation and increases in participation over time as well. Sustained increases in the number of retiree participants over the 5-year period that we looked at, and significantly larger increases both in total participants and total pledges in the last year as well. The number of retiree participants increased by 25% in 2023 as compared to 6%, 6.5% in 2022. And the total pledges increased by 20% as compared to 6% as well. So retirees are the ones who are still participating and participating in increasing numbers as well. The total amount they give is also increasing. You can see that the total amount is small. We're looking at just over 5 million of the 85 million in total, but a growing percentage of that. And as the retirees grow in size and more staff and more employees near retirement age, this is going to be an increasingly large, increasingly important segment of participation in the campaign and a place to focus on for increases. Volunteering and donating. So looking at overall generosity, looking at volunteers, do they also give? If so, do they give more? Do they give less than non-volunteers? Predominantly speaking, people who are volunteers are also much more likely to be donors as well. 89% of volunteers also donate dollars alongside their time. And this has maintained pretty stable levels over the last 5 years. If anything, there's been increases since 2019 that volunteers are more likely to donate money as well than in the past. And
sorry, Matt, I'll add to this that we've also seen some new data that shows overall that volunteering is a really important way of driving up retention. So it's if you get people to volunteer, they're much more likely to both donate as well as be retained as a donor. Just not just in the CFC campaign, but just looking at overall behavior.
Yeah, generosity breeds generosity. They definitely things go together in that respect as well. While volunteers are much more likely to give, they're also giving sort of smaller amounts when it comes to looking at the dollars as well. The red here is the average pledge size from non-volunteers, and blue is the average pledge size from volunteers. And so we can see that in 2023, volunteers pledged an average of $230, non-volunteers $330, roughly a $100 difference. The non-volunteer pledge size is also increasing at a faster rate than the volunteer pledge size, which actually decreased from 2022 to 2023. All right, so one of the big new things we looked at this year was looking at the impact of the charities and charity participation on participation of the donors and federal employees. Looking at, do charities come and leave, and if so, do donors come and leave with them? Are donors loyal to individual charities? And this can come back, I think, to the earlier question as well around those online donate now buttons on charity websites. That might be a part of the story as well. What we see is decreases in the number of charities participating, and I've had a chance to look at all the detailed questions and comments, but certainly I've seen some chat around the value of participating and the cost of participating, and so we do see decreases in the number of charities participating, over 6,000 in 2019 to around 4,500 or so in 2023, year-over-year drop of 8%. From 2022 to 2023. This is mostly due to retained charities, even though it's a smaller percentage, that the numbers are larger. Retained charities are leaving. At the same time, fewer new charities are signing up to participate in the campaign. The 28.7, 29% drop of participation from new charities in 2023 as compared to 2022. So more charities are choosing to not participate year over year, and fewer charities are joining as new participants. And why is this important? This is important because donors are loyal. Donors like to donate to the same charities year over year. 80% of retained participants, those participants who donated in the previous year and also donated this year, 87% of them donated to the same charity in 2023 as 2022. They may have also donated to other charities, but they've kept at least one of the charities in their giving pool as well. And so donors are loyal to charities. Charities are less likely to participate. The implication here is that when charities lapse, when charities choose to not participate, they are bringing donors with them. They're reducing participation themselves. This is where it gets back to that sort of the button and the different ways to donate to charities. If that charity loyalty is dominant, that the donor might choose to participate and choose to donate in other ways rather than through the CFC. Recognize that this is probably a confusing chart to look at. At first glance, not entirely clear what it's trying to say. So I'll focus in on just 1 year to start. On the left, we have charities lapsed. So these are charities that were active in 2022, but not active in 2023. So those that weren't participating in 2023. Charities retained are those that were active in both 2022 and 2023. And then the green and the red are that same for participants. So the green are the participants who participated in 2022 and 2023, and the red is those who participated only in 2022. So what we're seeing here is that if you donated to a charity in 2022 that did not participate in 2023, you are less likely yourself to participate in 2023 as well. The loyalty to the charity causes you to leave with the charity as well. And we see this, it is a small difference, but we see that difference consistently in 2020, 2021, and 2022 over the last 3 years. It did not exist in 2019 as well. So it seems to be a newer trend. And so at least some of the drop in participation is likely due to some of the drop in charity participation in the program as well. Why would charities no longer participate? I don't know, Woodrow, do you want to take that one? I feel like you would have an answer to that.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, partly this is, and I want to point out actually that a lot of these questions we don't have answers to. We see the behavior in the campaign. We have some speculation. We can contextualize what's going on in the overall market. But the questions are very useful nonetheless, because these indicate some things that are worthy of investigation. There are many factors that could affect that have already been raised in the chat about what the cost of participation is, kind of what that overhead looks like. What's been interesting is when we look at the organizations that leave, it doesn't seem to correlate well with an economic return on investment, which surprised us the first time we looked at it. We've got organizations that are getting an economic return that are quite large enough that, for example, that they're already getting an audit regardless. And what we see is some of those organizations churn out of the program nonetheless. And the converse is also true. We're going to see organizations that we think, they're not really they're getting a negative return, and yet they stick around year over year. Now, some of that we can identify. You're part of a federation or some other reason why you might not leave the program, even if you're not getting a direct return. But it is not always that clear what those reasons are. We would love to have a better sense of what are these organizations doing. I mean, a lot of the questions that have been asked definitely underscore our need for a better understanding of what attracts a charity to participate and stay, and how they're using the program, as well as what are charities doing outside of the program, and how is that working for them, and what are they doing if they leave? What do they change what they're how they're engaging, or what platforms they're choosing? What are they doing when they stay in the program outside of it? Like, all of those questions are really, at this point, we have only speculation. We could definitely generate a lot of hypotheses, but we don't have a full answer. Certainly, return on investment is obviously going to be a factor for some charities, including just their effort to participate, not necessarily economic return. But that's clearly also not the whole story.
And Woodrow, if I could add to that, yeah, I think you're right. When we've looked at the ROI, some charities that have a positive return don't come back. That may be due to staff turnover, and it may be due to another issue mentioned in the comment, the cost of an audit. And I do want to just let people know OPM is looking at changing our regulations to raise the audit threshold. There will be a presentation by Keith Willingham in August, looking at some of those proposed changes. Thanks for letting me chime in.
Yes, that's and actually another really important point to bring up, because turnover in charity staff is higher than we've seen in a long time, and it's affecting many components of the fundraising and programmatic environment for the sector.
It would also be interesting to look at that the flip side, those charities that are staying as participants, despite perhaps not seeing an obvious ROI that we can see in the data as well, to understand why they choose to continue to participate. Are there other values, other value that they're getting from participating that we don't see in this volunteering and giving data, that perhaps could be used as a part of charity recruitment and retention, and encouraging further participation of charities as well. The one place we do see on the charity side, again with the donors, we see the bright spot in the retirees. In the charities, we see bright spot, at least in 2023, in arts, culture, and humanities charities, both in terms of giving, where we see a significant increase in donations to arts, culture, and humanities charities over 2022 to 2023. 1.5 million to over 2.5 million, so a near 70% increase in donations to this sector, and more participation as well, slightly more participation as well, from around 125 to around 130. We did deep dive into this to try and understand what trends we could see, and what potential causes we could see why arts, culture, and humanities were on vogue in 2023, and all of our hypotheses were not borne out. Were not borne out by the data. So there's a question here as to why this is, but there's a bright spot that certainly is worth highlighting. And then the last piece before we jump into sort of a more formal Q&A is the impact of targeted communications and giving events. So over the campaign this year, there was a series of targeted communications, targeted messages to subsets of the potential participants. There were 3 emails sent out via an opt-in service, an opt-in choice. That these emails were sent out to the CFC mailing list in October, November, and early January. And I'll come back to in a second. Yes, I'll come back in a second. There's also 3 emails sent out to the holders of online accounts and 3 emails sent out to retiree participants and potential retiree participants. And in all of the cases, in the week before the email was sent, there was fewer pledges than in the week after the email was sent out. In many cases, it was small decrease, but in most cases, we're looking at near doubling, 90 to 100% increases, 90 to 100% increases in the number of pledges the week before to the week after the messages went out. In particular, for the online giving account holders, a message sent out in September was an over 1,000% increase, again, from a very small set of participants. One decrease for retiree services, but you can see there was already a lot of participation amongst retirees in early January. So it's likely not picking up much there. So targeted communications, targeted asks, reminders to participate, they work significantly well. And in particular, they work when they're aligned with giving events. We also looked at Giving Tuesday, and the date of the 28th of November last year aligns fairly closely with some of the messaging provided to the account holders. And again, we see significant increases in participation between the week before Giving Tuesday to the week after Giving Tuesday, both in terms of the number of pledges and in terms of the total dollar pledges, near doubling of both participation and dollars. So giving events lead to more giving, targeted communications lead to more giving, participation. Certainly something to take advantage of over the future years of the campaign.
And I'll just add,
yeah,
based on our analysis of Giving Tuesday overall, that might be interesting to some, Giving Tuesday in the US is the single biggest driver of donor acquisition. Giving Tuesday donors donated more than $3 billion in the 24 hours of the day last year, with also significant increases on the day before and a couple days following. So it's a big day for donations. What's interesting is that it's a very low average donation, and although it's what I had expected to see was, because it was such an enormous driver of acquisition, that we would see retention rates actually lower in that group, but we see the opposite. So not only is it the biggest driver of acquisition across the nonprofit sector for the US, it's also those donors retain at a higher level and have a higher lifetime value than the average. So it really is these giving moments. We saw other examples of giving moments like that similarly drove acquisition, and for donors who retained exceptionally well in 2020, both COVID related and otherwise, these giving moments really do bolster the sector in a big way.
Sorry, lost my unmute button for a second. These giving events are both positives, like Giving Tuesday, and also not so positive world events, as Woodrow suggested, around COVID. We've seen similar increases last year with the situation in Ukraine, and increases. The big natural disasters see increases as well, and so leveraging these disasters and these crises for increasing generosity and acquiring donors, that makes it then easier for them and more likely that they participate in future years as well. So that's the end of the formal part of our presentation. I think we got a few more minutes for Q&A, and seeing lots of chatter in the chat as well, but we can always dive in more deep to some of these, and we might have other data, other answers to some of the questions, as would have suggested. A lot are more good things we could speculate on, or good questions for future research as well, though. But yeah, happy to take any questions.
That's a great question. So Jasmine just put in the chat, do we have a breakdown of methods for Giving Tuesday? Assuming this means within the CFC. I don't think we looked at that particularly. Did we, Ben, to see if it was
Yeah,
more?
like mobile versus online versus paper, or new versus retained participants. No, we haven't looked at the details of Giving Tuesday or the targeted communications aside from the high level changes.
Yeah.
It's a really good
Well,
question.
we could certainly look at that week that there's basically a 5-day period where we see Giving Tuesday activity. We could certainly do a separate analysis of that and share it out through Tony, because that would be interesting to see if that if we see a similar difference in the campaign as we do in the overall market. Great question.
There also been a couple of questions about how do you market to retirees. So I wanted to clarify. So when Ben and Woodrow were talking about some of the targeted emails to retirees, the CFC gives messaging to OPM's retirement services, and they have a mailing list of 1 million retired government employees. In addition, we give some of that same messaging to the Defense Finance Service, because they communicate with retired members of the military. So when we're talking about sending targeted messages to retirees, we're going sort of at the 35,000 foot level to the people who control those lists. Again, keep in mind, we, the government, have to be fair to everyone. So we're not marketing an individual charity. If you wanted to market to retirees, there's certainly ways to look at where do federal retirees live. I'll tell you, there's 5 primary zones they live in, and you could probably all guess it by the amount of sunshine they get. In addition to Washington, D.C. being one of the northernmost places they retire to. But there's also social media, publications that target retirees. All of that public communication is open to you to do on your own. We don't do that for you, though.
Yeah, I really like this comment from Eric about just the value of directly engaging people. And it reminds me, a few years ago, the Gates Foundation asked me about workplace giving in particular. They wanted to know what is the most important technology for enabling workplace giving. And my answer was a little bit snarky, but my answer was the clipboard, because we can use the technology as a really good amplifier of behaviors and can reduce friction and can help us get our reach. But what matters is people engaging people. That is what drives behavior. And if we leverage our technological tools to do that, it can really help us do a better job. But the engagement and the personal connection is much, much more valuable than any technology can replace.
Woodrow, I used to say in training, I used to ask the participants, what's the #1 reason people give to charity? And while there's always answers about, hey, it makes me feel good, I'm doing something for others. What I used to say, and may or may not be current with your research, the #1 reason people give to charity is because they were asked by someone they know. Is that still true?
That is absolutely still true. Yeah, very, very much so. And in terms of what message works, urgency is the absolutely #1 driver. And right behind that is personal, emotional connection, and that is bolstered by who's doing the asking. So yes, that is the best way to get a donation, is being asked by somebody that you know and trust. And different environments, that means different things. I think in crowdfunding, oftentimes people are kind of giving as they're being generous to their friend, as opposed to the cause necessarily, although it can be a good on-ramp. But yes, absolutely, really important. Somebody asked a question here about using the CFC logo on things. I don't know of any testing of that, but I can tell you that my expectation is that it would that it would help. What we see in tests that have been done elsewhere is that that kind of branding does a lot to ensure that that the donor feels like they're taking a action with a trusted organization. And you actually don't need to say very much. In fact, I know one donation platform that found they got a significant increase in donation conversion by putting a green padlock icon next to their donate button that didn't have a tooltip, didn't have any, it wasn't linked to anything. It was just simply existed. That alone increased donation conversion. And there have been other tests with brands, brand names that are well known, and it definitely does seem to help particularly with conversion without having to talk about it too much. It just kind of becomes a seal of confidence. I think giving people the permission to take the action that they're emotionally driven to do.
And Woodrow, that may be a reason some of the charities with low return on investment stay, because that CFC logo on their materials is, to borrow someone else's brand, it's the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, for those of you old enough to understand that reference, on their materials. So it does say, we've passed those 10 hurdles of CFC requirements, and maybe gives people some confidence.
I was going to say the same thing, Tony, that there's hypotheses there as well that can be tested, and if there's research and that can be found to be true, there's another piece of a tool that can be used for recruiting of charities and charity retention as well. That the value of participation is more than just the volunteer hours and the donations you get directly, but also through having that seal and having the name brand that you can use for other fundraising, other opportunities as well.
And there's a couple of questions
here
you can probably answer. We don't think we have any analysis going before 2017 that we've done. But you can maybe speak to department breakdown, because that is something that we've looked at, right?
Yeah, I've looked. We haven't looked at which departments have the greatest percentage of participation. We didn't have easy access to overall numbers. I was looking and trying to find the exact numbers for just overall department participation as well as we were chatting. I do remember that it was again, because it's a very large Department of Defense has an outsized role to play in the success of the campaign, given their size, and so in some ways, as a DoD goes, the campaign goes as well, and so big, potentially small increases in participation there can lead to significant changes in the overall numbers. I'm just sort of still trying to find the numbers here from the actual departments. Apologies as I look for that. Maybe hop onto other questions.
While Ben looks at that, and these questions are jumping all around. Somebody had asked about whether donors have the ability to kind of indicate their preference. What we see is their preference based on their behavior, but obviously what we don't see is things like, are they looking for a particular organization or a cause that isn't represented, that kind of thing. And certainly we are interested in getting some in additional research that might be done into how well are the donors and employees served by the program, and what might be the kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities to engage them, not only in terms of cause area, but also just in terms of opportunities to give and give more often.
Also, if I could jump in, once you've been approved to be in the CFC, you are certainly able to go to givecfc.org and or opm.gov and download the CFC logos to use on your materials. There is a sign up for that, So there, it's all electronic. You just have to agree to use our brand guidelines for that. Also, there's a question from Casey about repeat donors. So again, there are CFC donors that release their names and contact information. So, you know, you can download your donor names from cfccharities.opm.gov, and you can look at that for every year going back to 2017 that you've been a part of the campaign. So, you know, that's also a possibility. And then one last thing, every charity does have the ability to say what of the common cause areas they do their primary services in. They can choose up to 3. So we definitely do look at what are the biggest cause areas people might give through. Clearly, human services, clearly healthcare, food and nutrition are among them. And as Ben was highlighting earlier, we saw tremendous growth in giving to arts and cultural issues last year. While during the pandemic, we saw a tremendous growth in giving to healthcare and food. So again, the things that the media covers certainly sets the agenda for what people think about.
And Tony, does everybody on this call have access to the report?
We will put the report on givecfc.org. So your full report will go there.
Great. So things like departmental breakdowns, I noticed there's a couple of questions about kind of the granularity there. Like there's a lot more depth in the report and a lot more breakdowns of things like the departmental breakdowns. And cause areas. Somebody else had asked about areas other than arts and culture, humanities. Yes, we have full breakdowns of cause area and the trends.
And Woodrow, what we'll do is when we post your slides, we'll post the PDF of the full report with it.
Sorry, I'm still trying to find it. I found only bits and pieces of the one chart I'm looking for. It is also the DoD and active service military is the set of departments that have the most participation. So active military across, you know, all of that entails citizens and uniformed service as well, Department of Defense. And there's also sort of bright spot areas as well. Texas Gulf Coast and Pacific Northwest in particular had lots of participation. And so if people know the departments in those areas as well, sorry for taking so long to find the actual chart. I can picture it in my mind.
It's a great reason for people to dig into the report and those breakdowns.
I want to answer one other question. I think there's been some questions about how do can you tie in with particular, cause area for military and military families and military welfare. There is both a cause area for that, as well as some federations that focus on it. So again, you can, during this listing phase, it's active right now, you can tie your charity to up to 3 of those cause areas when you complete the listing phase. And if you are an independent charity, there are some federations you could consider aligning yourself with that bundle you with like-minded charities on that same score. I know that Curtis and Elizabeth have some very important announcements to make. And I want to take this last second to thank Woodrow and Ben for A, doing the work, and B, coming here today to share it with you. So, gentlemen, we thank you. And
sorry, I've found the numbers. Sorry, before you finish, I just found the numbers. Social Security Administration, Department of Education, Executive Office of the President, Legislative, Health and Human Services, Transportation, retirees, HUD, and defense. Those were the big ones.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Tony, and thank you everybody for these great questions. And I know that oftentimes when we look at this kind of thing, the question is always, well, why? Why does this happen? And do know that the questions that we don't yet have answers to are, again, they have a lot of utility. It's really helpful for us to think about how our analysis can improve every year. So thank you very much for that and for the excellent engagement. It's been a pleasure talking to everybody.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you guys. It's fascinating work that you do. It's eye-opening and generated a lot of questions. So I know we're going to have more as people start going through that report. So, to that end, I want to remind everybody that we will be posting everything. So you will have the slides, you'll have the report that they talked about. You will also have links to the recordings of these trainings. It'll take us a few days to get all of those recordings uploaded. But when they're available, we're going to send you the link via email. So expect that next week. And another reminder that you're going to be receiving a survey in the next day or so to let us know what you thought of this first week of training and any recommendations you may have for going forward. Because we're going to take a break for a few weeks, and then we're going to come back in August. August 19th will be the first day of the next week of training. And we're going to really dive into the nuts and bolts of the campaign with things like regulatory changes that you've heard Tony talk about, CFC ethics and marketing plan for 2024, and so much more. So I hope that you'll come back. I hope that you'll invite others to join us. And in the meantime, please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. On behalf of the CFC Foundation Board, I want to thank you very much for being part of this training. Take care.
Thanks, Curtis.